Welcome back to GH Updates, your go-to spot for all the drama, revelations, and explosive secrets from General Hospital. Buckle up, because the episode airing on Monday, June 2nd, 2025, is nothing short of a seismic shakeup in Port Charles. Let's break it all down. General Hospital will reveal the courtroom had never felt so suffocating, so charged with quiet anticipation and hidden dread as it did the moment Michael and Willow entered, prepared to battle for the custody of Wei and Amelia. What was meant to be a legal showdown over parenting and stability soon unraveled into a deeper stalker confrontation, exposing layers of betrayal, buried secrets, and devastating truths. At the center of this unraveling storm stood Rick, a cunning and relentless attorney who's a reputation for exploiting weaknesses and capitalizing on subtle inconsistency is well known. But this time, Rick cameroned not just with legal acumen, but with a covert alliance forged in shadows with none other than Nina, who, dispute, hin, or moil, had chosen to act in a desperate attempt to prevent Willow from leaving Port Charles and taking her grandchildren with her. Rick's line of questioning began innocuously enough, echoing routine inquiries about parenting, history, emotional stability, and household environments. Michael responded with calm, composite confidence, believing the facts and the support of his legal counsel would be now. But Rick had no intention of keeping the battle on the surface like a predator circling its prey. He shifted the tempo with chilling precision, drawing attention to discrepancies in Michael's timeline. Two unspoken connections, two inconsistencies, too slight for most to notice, but too glaring for Rick to ignore. He brought up Sasha casually at first, then persistently until the courtroom held its breath. He asked why their romantic story had been downplayed. He questioned the exact timeline of their last known contact. And then, with a smooth, cruelty-born oath experience, he introduced the first of several pieces of evidence that sent their room into stunned silence. Blurry photographs, suspiciously timed text messages, thought long deleted, and cell tower data from a single evening weeks prior. All carefully obtained, all strategically incomplete but damning in their implications. Rick didn't need a paternity test or a full confession. He only needed to see Douto push the narrative just enough to fracture Michael's carefully crafted image of honesty and paternal devotion. Michael faltered. His previously unwavering gaze shifted. He looked to Diane, his attorney, to Willow, who stared back with growing suspicion, and finally to Sasha, who had turned pale, her breathing shallow. When Michael finally admitted in halting words that he and Sasha had indeed seen each other privately. During the period in question, the tension in the courtroom became unbearable. And when Rick suggested almost offhandedly that Sasha's pregnancy timeline aligned all too conveniently with that clandestine meeting, Michael had no defense left. The damage was done. That courtroom, one so certain of the narrative of a devoted father, fighting for his children, now pulsed with the realization that they were witnessing something far more complex and far more devastating. The eruption came not from Michael nor from Rick, but from Sasha herself, with tears streaming down her face and a voice trembling from through it of months of secrecy. She rose from her seat and asked the court for permission to speak. What followed was a confession, not just of fact, but of emotion, raw, painful, and irreversible. She spoke of the night with Michael, of the confusion and guilt that had followed, of discovering her pregnancy and deciding, in an act of desperate love and fear, to remain silent. She had not wanted to disrupt the custody case. She claimed she had not wanted to be there as Michael lost his children, nor did she want to bring more chaos into Willow's already wounded life. But the pressure had grown unbearable. The lies had become poison, and now, with the truth clawing its way to the surface, she could no longer contain it. Sasha's confession robed through the courtroom like a cannon blast. Every eye turned to her, then to Michael, whose face was now flushed with shame. This was no longer a question of misjudgment or oversight. It was a betrayal, one that threatened to destroy fragile trust still lingering between him and Willow. And Willow in thought, moment transformed. Whatever flickers of empathy she may have once felt for Michael and Sasha were extinguished by fury ignited by their deception, with a fire in her eyes and a composure sharpened by months of emotional war. Willow stepped forward, not to plead her case, but to deliver a searing, unrelenting condemnation of the two people she once considered family. Her voice did not tremble. Her words were laced with precision and venom, a declaration of moral authority as much as a legal one. She accused Michael of cowardice, of prioritizing his selfish desires over the well-being of the children they both claimed to love. She labeled Sasha a liar, an opportunist hohad, chosen complicity over integrity. Every syllable carved deeper wounds, not only in Michael and Sasha, but in the fabric of their broken relations. The judge, visibly shaken by their revelations and emotional intensity, called for a brief recess, but the damage had already crystallized into conclusion. Dion's defense weakened by the weight of Michael's admission. Rick, ever the tactician, had succeeded in steering the narrative. The remaining proceedings were mere formality. When the judge returned, the verdict was swift. Custody both way and Amelia would be awarded to Willow. The court found her to be thermostable, honest, and consistent in the children's lives. Michael, though still granted visitation rights, would have to adhere to a strict schedule and submit to periodic visit. The gavel struck, sealing. Not just a legal decision, but the collapse of a family. As the courtroom emptied, Michael remained seated, his eyes hollow. Sasha, still sobbing, was led out quietly by a court officer. Rick pocketed his documents without expression, but a glint of triumph flickered in his eyes. Na watched from afar, seen by most, her heart heavy with the weight of her choice. She had not intended for it toned like this, a tone, but in her desperation, to preserve what she loved, she had helped ignite a fire that now threatened to consume them all. And in the echo of steps, the dust of judgment and desolence that follows every storm. The consequences of silence, betrayal, and hidden truths settled over everyone like ash from a fire long overdue. Willow, once the quiet victim of heartbreak and betrayal, emerged in the courtroom like a force of nature, long restrained. She was no longer the woman haunted by Michael's past decisions. No longer the grieving mother silently enduring loss after loss. Instead, she became a woman transformed by pain, sharpened by disillusionment, and emboldened by a truth that had burned inside her for too long. As the lie surrounding Michael and Sasha came crashing down, Willow seized the moment, not merely to reclaim what was taken from her, but to decimate the illusion that had shielded the two people she once trusted most. Her presence, when she rose to speak, was commanding and unshakable, with a voice edged in sorrow, but burning with fury. She unleashed a torrent of words that cut deeper than any legal ruling could. Her accusations weren't made with hysteria, but with clarity. A precision born from the countless nights she had spent wondering how and when everything had started to fall apart. She laid bare the emotional destruction Michael had caused, not just by cheating or lying, but by eroding the fundamental trust that their family had once relied on. She turned her gaze to Sasha next, condemning her not only as a woman who had chosen to remain silent in the face of injustice, but as someone who had willingly become complicit in dismantling a fragile family unit for the sake of her own protection. Every word landed like a hammer blow. Michael shrank into himself, visibly rattled, his eyes flickering between shame and regret. Sasha, pale and broken, sat still with tears on her cheeks, but no words left to defend herself. Willow's expression ever wavered. The courtroom, previously so. Electric with tension, had fallen utterly silent under the weight of her righteous fury. The years of emotional aspersions, the struggle to hold her marriage and motherhood together, the slow unraveling of hope, everything nosurged forward, not as a plea for sympathy, but as a reckoning. Willow had come to reclaim more than her children. She had come to reclaim her narrative. The judge, a seasoned ed professional who had witnessed countless custody, visibly struggled to maintain composure. Though bound by duty to remain impartial, even he could not fully mask the impact of Willow's words. What had begun as a straightforwardest over custody had been transformed into a moral reckoning, owning which the true character of each parent was now laid bare. Diane's efforts to defend Michael Beckham increasingly strained, her arguments collapsing under the sheer weight of his admissions and the emotional devastation they had caused. The portrait she had painted of Michaela's irresponsible, stable, and selfless father was now nothing more than a shattered facade. After a short deliberation that seemed to stretch into eternity, the judge returned with thrilling. The courtroom, though expecting the outcome, still collectively held its breath. In calm but firm tones, the judge announced the decision: full physical and legal custody of both Y and Amelia would be awarded to Willow. The reasoning was clear and unequivocal. Her integrity had remained intact throughout the proceedings. Her dedication to the children had never faltered, and most critically, she had proven herself to be the only adult in the equation who had consistently acted in their best interests. Michael, though not stripped of visitation rights, would now be closely monitored under the supervision of the court. His failure to disclose of a talfonate, coupled with his continued emotional entanglement with Sasha, had severely damaged his credibility and the court's trust in his judgment. For Willow, the ruling brought not just relief, but vindication. In that courtroom, she had reclaimed everything that had been taken from her: her dignity, her children, and her agency as a mother. But it was not just a legal victory. It was the collapse of a long-standing emotional prison, one that had kept her confined within. The guilt, the hope, and the misplaced love she had continued to harbor for Michael long after he had ceased to deserve it. And in Thiftermouth, Drew, whose presence had once been quiet and supportive, became a something more permanent. Having stood by Willow through every moment of chaos, through the humiliation, the betrayal, and now the triumph, Hequiatly became her sanctuary. Despite whispers and judgment from the outside world about their unconventional pairing, Drew stood firm. He didn't care that she had once been married to his nephew. What mattered waste life they were building now, founded not on lies or obligations, but on mutual understanding and shared scars. Society could gossip all it wanted. In the eyes of those who mattered, Way, Amelia, and Willow herself, Drew had become a rock in the storm. A man who had chosen to love without expectation and support without condition. Together, Willow and Drew began to forge a new chapter, not defined by the sins of the past, but by the healing they had earned. The Chowstat had erupted in that courtroom reigned behind them like a battlefield scarred by war. But from its ashes rose something far more enduring: truth, resilience, and a hard-won peace. For Willow, who had once been the most betrayed, to now be the most whole, it was a victory that echoed far beyond any legal decree. It was the quiet redemption of a woman who had finally found her voice, and in doing so, reclaimed her power. Michael left the courtroom in a haze of numb silence, each step echoing like the final toll of a bell. His eyes, once brimming with conviction and pride, were now hollow, stripped of fire, and dulled by the crushing weight of defeat. The howl outside the courtroom, lined with thin front faces and murmurs of scandal, felt like a gauntlet he had no strength to face. He did not glance back, did not raise his head. His world, once built on control and calculated risk, had collapsed in full view of the public eye. The courtroom verdict had stripped him not only of custody, but of something deeper. The carefully guarded persona of a man who could contain all his sins behind a curtain of noble intentions. Just feet away, slumped on a cold wooden bench, Sasha sat. Motionless, her shoulders hunched forward as if physically burdened by shame. Her hands trembled in her lap, her eyes red and glassy. Fixed on a spot on the floor, they'd offered no comfort, no reprieve. Every breath she took seemed like a battle against the urge to collapse accompli. She had come into court knowing her secrets, danced Dangerous likeless to the edge, but she had not prepared for them to be dragged into Thelight in such brutal fashion. Now, with every whisper that passed her by, every sidelong glance, she felt the judgment trap around her like a noose. She couldn't bring herself to look at Michael, not after the courtroom turned their shared truth into a public disgrace. Whatever lingering connection they had was buried beneath the rubble of exposedlies and shattered dignity. Rick walked past them. With thickened of detached satisfaction only a seasoned manipulator could wear with such composure. His briefcase clicked shut with mechanical finality, as if sealing away another job well done. He did not gloat, did not smile, but the cold gleam in his eyes prayed, a man who had orchestrated his victory down to the last syllable. For Rick, it was not merely about justice or truth, it was strategy, a masterclass in psychological warfare. And he had won without drawing a single drop of his own blood. He left the courthouse as he had entered it, untouched by the emotional carnage he had helped unleash. From a shadowed corner, Nina stood silent, her expression tight, her chest rising and falling with shallow, uneven breaths. She had not entered. The courtroom had not dared to look Willow in the eyes, or for Sasha's pain directly, but she had watched, heard enough to know what her whispered truths had set in motion. Her heart ached with the contradictions of Amathar, who had acted out of love, but delivered evasion. In one respect, she had succeeded. Willow would remain in Port Charles, tethered to her children, and Nina would not be excellent from their lives. But the price had been steep. She had destroyed what little peace Sasha had found, exposing her deepest vulnerabilities to the courtroom wolves. Na's instincts had screamed against it, but her desperation had been louder. For mother's survival often comes at the expense of mercy, and in thought-brutal calculus, Nina had made her choice. Yet, even in victory, a gnawing guilt settled beneath her skin. She had not just betrayed Sasha's trust, she had weaponized it. She had sacrificed a woman she once claimed Tolof like a daughter for the daughters bore in blood. And now, as she watched Sasha sitting broken and alone, Nina could not pretend that her motives were pure or that the ends justified the means. Her lips pressed together, tithe of emotion rising within her, but the truth sat heavy in her heart. This too was a kind of motherhood, one where protection came cloaked in cruelty. But the true nightmare was only beginning for Michael and Sasha. The courtroom was not the end, but the prologue to a long and painful reckoning. The confession of their deception was more than just emotional betrayal. It bore legal consequences. Questions swirled about perjury, about fraudulent paternity claims, about how deep the web of Lashad extended. Michael now faced inquiries from child services and potential sanctions from the court. Sasha's reputation, all red news, had been dragged through the mood yet again. And in the court of public opinion, ruthless, rapid, and unforgiving, both of them were already found guilty. More than that, the emotional toll had just begun to unravel. Guilt crept into their quietments like an unwelcome specter. Every time Sasha felt the stir of the life inside her, she could no longer connect it with joy, but with dread and doubt. Every time Michael thought of Way and Amelia, he no longer imagined futures filled with laughter and growth, but quartered visits filled with awkward silences and the weight of absence. Their silence, once a shield to protect what they thought was fragile, had to pump a blade, turning inward, cutting deeper with each passing day. They were haunted not just by what they had done, but by the realization that they hadn't it taught themselves. The fortress of secrecy they had built to protect their respective truths had become a prison. And now Thessalons they had relied upon for protection was their undoing? A cold, merciless sword slicing through every layer of denial. What a whirlwind of emotion, betrayal, and bombshell revelations. Monday's episode promises to change the lives of Port Charles residents forever. Will Michael recover from Sasha's revelation? Will Nina's secrets destroy her credibility? And is this really the end for Curtis and Portia? One thing's for sure, General Hospital is just getting started. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to GH Updates for your daily dose of drama. We'll be right here, bringing you every twist, every turn, and every unforgettable moment. Until next time, stay tuned, Port Charles fans.